Shall I start, Pella, or is that okay?
Yes.
Good, good. Welcome all to our webinar and our meeting on faith and on Ecocide, Faith for Ecocide Law. We have a small group in Sweden started to discuss how can we make give more attention to the need of a international law on ecocide, to add that to the different laws that we have against humanity and so on, because we see that this is an important way of acting for a more sustainable future. I am Henrik Grape. I am a pastor in Church of Sweden, but also working for World Council of Churches as their senior advisor on care for creation and climate justice. I'm the leader of the climate change group, working group of climate change from World Council of Churches. And this is an organization with a community of churches from Orthodox, Anglican, Protestant, and diverse of churches all over the world, a global fellowship. We have been working on climate change for many years. And also I'm the co-chair of the Interfaith liaison committee to the UNFCCC, to the climate convention. So this is a work that is connected to this, but mainly this work have come out of a good work from the Christian Council of Sweden together with Stop Ecocide Sweden, to think on how can we gather faith leaders to promote an ecocide law. So just for a start, we have this manifesto for ecocide law, for Faith for Ecocide Law, where we try to point out why this is important. And what I think is important with Faith for Ecocide is that faith all over the world guides people on what to do, and also give narratives to why we're here. But it also very much gives us the understanding of our relationship to nature and to the ecosystem. But it also, in all our faith traditions, I'll say there's an important part that is about protecting the most vulnerable. And we have it in our different traditions. For with poor people, we must protect those vulnerable in our societies. In this time when we live in what we call Anthropocene, when humanity is behind the steering wheel of the future of the whole planet, it is even more important what kind of ethical decision we make, the moral decision that we make as humanity when it comes to the ecosystem. So I think that is an important part why we as from faith traditions should come up with a discussion on how to protect the ecosystem. So for me, this is a way of challenging anthropocentric views that, especially I would say in Christianity, but also in other religions, to challenge the anthropocentric view, to understand the interdependence that we all are living in when it comes to healthy ecosystem, and also to protect those ecosystems. And the law can be helpful for that. So I hope for a rich conversation from our panelists who will be talking soon. But first I give the floor to Pella to give us some more on ecocide law, what it means. Over to you, Pella.
Thank you, Henrik. Thank you for that introduction. And before I say something about ecocide law, I would just want us to connect with this world that we are a part of. So I invite you to close your eyes for a minute or two and just imagine the immensity of this blue-green planet, which is your home, the only home that humanity knows. the home that we all share. And with your imagination, bring to your consciousness the deep seas and the breathing forests. And just remember that when you're breathing, your breath right now is always with the forests and with the seas. You cannot stop yourself from breathing with the world. And maybe that's actually what spirituality is about. If you stop that, you'll die. And imagine the high mountains of the world, the vast grasslands, the rivers, the deserts, all the fantastic beings that we share this rich and beautiful planet with. And come back to this screen and this webinar that we share together today. And it's so great to have you all here, and to also see in the chat that people are actually from a lot of places in the world. That's fantastic. And now when we know that the world we inhabit is actually threatened with mass damage and destruction on a global scale, we understand that we need new rules in common to protect the nature that we know that we are a part of. And the idea that we want to talk about here today is the idea of law at the very highest level. And I'm going to share my screen with you. But not that one, sorry. Nej. Aha, sorry, it wants to be that one.
Just to say while Pella looks for the screen, you can use the Q&A to put questions during the talks, and we can bring them out later. So now you found your screen.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Thank you, computer. So law for the earth on the very highest level is what Ecocide Law is about. And when we know that our beautiful earth is damaged on a very vast scale, we need to do something. And this is something we've been aware of for a very long time. So we are breaking planetary boundaries now in a serious way. And some of you have just come back from the climate conference in Glasgow, where climate change was discussed. And as you can see, that's just one of the boundaries we are breaking, where we're transgressing the safe space for humanity. There are others where we are far out on a red area here. Biodiversity, for example, biosphere integrity, the diversity of life, land system change, and also biogeochemical flows. And all of these are connected, of course. And this is not new at all. This model of planetary boundaries is coming from the Stockholm Resilience Center. And with that knowledge, which we've had for a long time, we have also together united ourselves towards the sustainable development goals on many areas of what we can call sustainability. But according to me, I'm an ecologist, so I think that we have to acknowledge that there's actually a hierarchy in these goals, where we know that we cannot have a healthy economy if we don't have a healthy and just society with well-being for all. And we cannot have that if we don't have healthy ecosystems. So actually, there is no sustainable development possible in the long run, or actually no development at all, if we don't have healthy nature. And since we know that we don't have that at the moment, we need to have new rules. And the idea that we are working with is to have ecocide as one of the crimes at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And those are at the moment 4, the crimes that is possible to handle there. The other one, the most serious crimes, the crimes that are so serious that the whole international community needs to care. And they are at the moment genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression. And what we want to do is to add a 5th crime, the crime of ecocide. And this is actually not a very new idea. The first international conference on environmental issues was the Stockholm Conference back in 1972, almost 50 years ago, where the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme used the term ecocide. And that idea has since been spoken a lot. And the need for a law against ecocide has become more and more urgent. And actually, when the Rome Statute, the governing document of the International Criminal Court, when that was developed in the 90s, ecocide or damage to nature was part of the discussions, but it was taken away. And since the economy nowadays, in a very different way from what was the case in 1972 at the Stockholm Conference, it's a global economy, but it's more or less without rules. I used to think of it as a cowboy economy, where the large actors are very powerful and there are no frameworks to govern them, since law is almost exclusively on a national basis. So there has been literally hundreds of treaties and conventions on the environmental area since the Stockholm Conference. But we are seeing a situation where we have a very dangerous climate change and where we are eroding the basis of life as we know it on a global scale. So we need to do something on a different level. And this is a framework that's already existing. The institutions are already there. We can actually, it's quite a simple process to add ecocide as a crime. And personally, I've been working with this idea for quite a long time. And the most common question we get is, okay, so what is ecocide then? What do you mean when you say ecocide? And the short version is mass damage and destruction of nature. But actually this year, a panel of top legal experts have been convened by Stop Ecocide International, which is our international organization. And in June, they proposed a definition of ecocide as a crime. So in the Rome Statute, it would mean unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. So that's the proposed definition of ecocide. And what has happened since, and actually since one of the first high-level people talking about the need for ecocide law was Pope Francis back in 2019. And since then, many voices have been speaking out now about the urgency of this new international legislation. So one of them is also the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. It's highly desirable to include ecocide as a crime at the International Criminal Court, he said this summer. And as Henrik spoke about, we believe that voices from faith communities are really important for this issue, because it's actually speaking about how we as a humanity relate to the creation or to nature or to Mother Earth or whatever label we use, because there's an urgent need now for us to understand that we are part of nature and we need to govern ourselves as parts, as healthy parts of the world, of the biosphere. So the bishops of Sweden towards COP26 in Glasgow, they also said that they backed the call for ecocide to be an internationally recognized crime under the Rome Statute of the Criminal Court. And we are working now increasingly towards the Stockholm Plus 50 conference, which will be in June next year, where we think if we are really serious about sustainable development, we need at least to make the worst destruction of nature into a crime. And that's what this is about. So
thank you, Pella. I am so eager to listen to our panelists today. So I would like to first invite Rabbi Awraham Soetendorp to come up with some thoughts on this subject. Rabbi Awraham has a long history working on interfaith, on ecological issues over the years. It's too long to bring all them up, but he has been a really good and inspiring force for many of us in the interfaith work over the years. And I'm so happy to have you here today. So please, Rabbi, the floor is yours.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be together, and it's precious. When you just spoke about ecocide, and next to the first two, genocide and crimes against humanity, I cannot but express my feelings, being a child survivor from the war that made it so clear that we need international law and we need international protection. And I want to speak in the name of my father of blessed memory, who hidden in a farm in Holland, while not knowing whether his son was alive and safe in hiding. And he wrote for a boy that had to become bar mitzvah, but was hidden in a chicken farm not far away. He wrote for him about principles of Judaism to teach him. And he came to the passage that we so much know, the passage when God says in creation, Na'aseh Adam, let us create a human being. And the sense that asks for cooperation between the human being and God in the creation of what the human being could be, the decisive force in this whole nature. And my father wrote, never forget, God created the whole earth for the human being and gave the human being the task to complete the creation so that the whole earth would be filled with cooperation, love, truth, and righteousness. And this is the notion that the whole earth is dependent on those choices the human being makes. And when in my lifetime, I have been so encouraged by the quiet revolution that has taken place, that more and more people from different spiritual traditions understand and act with this understanding that we desperately need each other to fulfill the common goal of justice and peace, which is also the task to preserve the community of life on this earth. Working for the Earth Charter was for many of us in the end of the 90s an attempt to put soft law and to express our desire. And we know that the Earth Charter starts with the words, we stand at a crucial moment in Earth history. But just for a few moments to explain that hours before we, after 5 years of searching with people all around the world, working on the Earth Charter, just hours before, Stephen Rockefeller was one of the people who asked the question. Up till that time, it was not, it did not speak about Earth history, but about human history. And the question was, has the time not come to speak about Earth history? And I remember that Stephen said to me that all the churches, everybody of religion will be in upheaval because we put Earth history and not human history. And we said, whatever happens, let's put the focus on our common home on Earth. We have moved a long way. And I very much endorse what you have just spoken about, because we need laws. As we realize in this moment of crisis of Corona, that the nations of the earth, representing populations, have pledged, when we were searching for a vaccine, that we would make sure that everyone on earth would have access to this vaccine to protect his or her health. But we've broken those promises. And we see it. In largest part of the world, there is no access. And there is a division between rich and poor. And the same applies also to the climate change. We need more, in some way, enforced, or the choice of not to be completely without laws and order. In Hebrew, cherut, freedom, is also the same word for engraving in laws. You cannot really have freedom without also a law system that protects this freedom. So I applaud. But in a few words, I just want to express that I feel that we in the interfaith world, we may have to make a further step and say and express in our conviction that we are at the gate of a sacred decade. We only have 10 years in which we have to give the fundaments for sustaining living on this planet. And so we have to dare to say that this is what God in all its names is asking us to do. no delay. And just a thought that I live with for so long, connected with it, is that we need a council of conscience, which is more important than the Security Council. And this conscience, which is connected with a ecocide law, would, I wish and pray, protect us from the darkness of destruction. Love for the generations yet unborn has to be the motivation, not a fear of catastrophe, but this love connected with conscience and buttressed and strengthened by law. May that be our salvation.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, for those words. I think this is a real good start, and you're really giving us something to think of and to explore more. I will now give the floor to Gopal Patel, who has from the Hindu tradition, and we have been working together with Green Faith. We have been to COPs together on bicycles and not on bicycles, and I'm so happy to have you here. You also have a long history in this. Even if you're a young person, you have done lots already. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Henrik, for that kind introduction, and to you and Pella and the whole team for having me here. And it is a real honor and privilege to be here. And I feel a bit overwhelmed after hearing the Rabbi speak to follow in his words. But I'll try to share a little something from the Hindu, from why I think from a Hindu perspective this work is so important and timely and needed. And I would say from a Hindu perspective, Hinduism is very ethereal, holy, very spiritual, but it also gets into the nuts and bolts of the reality of the world and how things should function. And so that's how I want to kind of frame my remarks. Because on one hand, Hinduism talks about the equality of all life. For example, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that we should see all life as equal, understanding that the same spiritual spark that animates us as humans is the same spark that animates the animals, the trees, the plants, the rivers, mountains, and oceans. There is an equality, a spiritual equality that exists within the world. And then in the Bhagavad Purana, which is a much larger text, and one of my favorite verses from that, it says that the ether, the air, the fire, and the water, the earth and the planets, creatures, directions, trees, plants, rivers, and oceans, it says that all of these are organs of God's body. And by remembering this, a devotee respects all species of life. And so that's the part of Hinduism that talks about the spiritual importance of the natural world, of how everything is equal, everything animated has a right to life, but also that the world itself is the body of God, and all the natural elements, the rivers, oceans, mountains, and so on, are seen as to be organs of the body of God. And if we really internalize that message, obviously, we won't cause harm to the natural world. But as we know, we're not perfect, and we do cause harm to the world, although we have these rich teachings in all of our traditions. And so within Hinduism, in specifically the Arthashastras, or the text related to governance and politics, it lays down certain laws or rules for how one should conduct themselves in relation to the natural world, which focuses more on, well, less on the religious and spiritual aspect, but more on, as Pella, you were saying, that we need a thriving ecosystem. We need a thriving natural world for human health, for human well-being, and for human flourishing. And so, for example, there's a wonderful verse I just came across recently where a king in Rajasthan of the name Vansh Pradeep Singh, he would say to his people, he would say that if you cut the smallest branch of a tree, it is like you have cut my finger. And he was very zealous in his protection of trees in his kingdom. But as I mentioned in the Arthashastras, it talks about fines or punishments for harming the natural world. And I really like some of these. It's that there are fines for injuring and killing animals, again, for cutting and injuring trees and plants. There are fines for destruction of waterways, rivers, oceans, and lakes, and so on. And even fines for throwing dirt on the streets. If you did that, you would be fined. And so what you see there is that in Hindu texts that talk about governance and politics, and the roles for rulers and kings, that there are laws there that protect the natural world and punishments for people who kind of violate those laws. In the Mahabharata, for example, another large text within Hinduism, it says that, I really love this one, it says that if someone has cut a tree or a creeper or a shrub, they should recite 100 verses from scripture. And if someone is guilty of cutting a medicinal plant, they should fast by only drinking milk for 1 day. And so you have these wide varieties of rules and regulations and punishments and fines for defiling or harming the natural world, which span both the spiritual reasons for why we should care for the natural world, but also the very practical, economical, health and well-being reasons we should care for the natural world, all coming from the canon of Hindu texts. And coming to why I think this law is really important, I think from a Hindu perspective, what it does, it is an attempt for Hindu worldviews, beliefs and values and understandings to be reflected in international law. I think, the international system in which we live, came out of a certain period in the world after the Second World War, informed by certain values and beliefs, mainly of developed Western nations. And we know that they are incomplete, or we know there is more to add to that. We know that the philosophies, the beliefs and values of other cultures, other philosophies, other religions need to be reflected in the international system and international law and governance and institutions. And I think what this Ecocide law that we're proposing, or that your team is proposing and that we're supporting here today, is an attempt for us as Hindus to say, we've always believed that the earth is sacred. We've always believed there are implications for harming the natural world. Why isn't that reflected in law? It's preponderant. It's ridiculous in many ways if you look at it. And so it's very much welcome that this is an attempt to align international law with the beliefs and values of people right across the world who hold very varying understandings of what it means to care for the natural world, but all have that commitment to protect and uphold ecosystems, biodiversity, to address climate change for human health and well-being. And so, again, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much to all of you who have done this work over the last year or so to bring this law to the table, and full support and help and whatever you need from myself and my organization, whatever we can bring to further the cause. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gopal. It's really interesting to listening to your worldview when it comes to the relationship between humanity and the ecosystems from a really long tradition from the Hindu world. So I think that is also so interesting to listen to, but also to reflect on, and also I think that we can also find bits and pieces of this kind of thinking from our tradition and from indigenous traditions as well. So I think that is really helpful. I will now turn to Sheikh Abdal, Hakim, Murad for giving us some thoughts. You're a new acquaintance to me. I'm really happy to have you here. I understand that you are a theologian and Islamic scholar who has worked on, and also a thinker in many ways, also on the relationship between the Islamic view on and this sort of the societies around. And I think that I'm really interested to listen into your thoughts about the Ecocide Law and from a Muslim perspective. So the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, and thanks to everybody for honouring me with this invitation. It's part of the very honourable role that Sweden, I think, plays in the world, that it tends to be at the forefront, ahead of the curve, perhaps, of these attempts to make what is of local concern of global concern. And it's delightful to see that that is continuing in what is now the world's principal headache, I think, which is the question of climate change. I think another thing that has already emerged from the discussions that we've had is that this is going to be the kind of issue where substantially the great religious traditions find themselves in agreement. On some other issues, perhaps we don't, but on this, I think we are in agreement. And after all, it is the case that the climate crisis was not caused by religion or by any one religion, but was caused by an unbalanced and profane use and instrumentalizing of the material world by an essentially unsustainable materialism. So one would like to see the religions uniting as much as possible, putting up a common front to heal the world that secularity and a profane view of the world as simply there, the human usufruct has precipitated. I suppose coming at it from the specifically Muslim vocabulary, one would want to begin with the role of Adam, I suppose, in a cosmic system that the Quran constantly reminds us is made up of autonomous, self-regulating communities of different living species. Many verses in the Quran talk about there is no animal that walks upon the earth, nor any bird that flies with its two wings, but that they are nations like yourselves. And of course, the commentators have always scratched their heads as to on what basis can they be like ourselves. But certainly classical Islamic ethics, classical Islamic law does recognize what we would nowadays call animal ethics and animal rights. And the idea of every order of creation as praising God in its own particular way is again kind of standard of Quranic discourse. So what's the role of the human community within this? In what sense are we custodians? In what sense could we actually frame laws in order to protect others from the damage which our particular species, our community has done? Well, the role of Adam, the kind of paradigmatic human being, is enigmatic insofar as Adam falls. But then we have the great Quranic verse towards the beginning where original sin comes to an end. Adam repents to God, God relents to Adam, and there is no inherited defect of grace. Nonetheless, we don't get back to go back to that paradigmatic world where climate change would be unimaginable, the Edenic sphere. We are here in this world of ebb and flow with these other communities which have rights over us, which all in their own way are praising the source of their being. And looking around us, we find signs. And this perhaps is another area where we're going to agree that we're not just talking about ecocide, but something that sometimes the theologians call epistemicide. In other words, we're not just in danger of destroying our life support system in a kind of utilitarian way, but the species is in danger of destroying those signs of beauty in natural environments, in virgin nature, which sustain our spiritual life. So it's a spiritual as well as a physical massacre. And that's another reason why I think religion has a particular precious role to play in this. And again, I'm sure that all of our traditions regard the natural world not just as there to keep us alive, but as something that has value in its own right, as something that is luminous with transcendence and is our means of intuiting and engaging with transcendence. So the sanctity of the physical world. And again, just to close with some reflections, one of the features of the life of the Prophet, the founder of Islam, is his engagement with nature. There are so many stories that rather mysteriously in many ways seem to have him communicating to animals. Animals would complain to him if their owners were maltreating them. He would be angry if birds were taken out of their nests just as pets. He forbade the use of animals as targets, for instance, so blood sports are generally not allowed in classical Islamic ethics. And there's even more enigmatic statements about there being some kind of spiritual presence in physical, non-animate things. Mountains, he could hear pebbles praising God in his hands. There's a certain element of a recognition of a world that again is not just out there as part of the interesting scenery as we trot on to the real disclosure of the spiritual in the next world, but of a world which is nothing other than God's signs, which is absolutely packed with luminescence that leads us back to the divine source, and therefore should be treated with reverence rather than just a utilitarian way. So Adam, yes, fallen and then unfallen, because original sin came to an end, has some kind of duty of care and custodianship, but without that custodianship becoming potentially abusive. So classical Islamic law, how would that relate to a crime of ecocide? Well, Islamic law is not statutory law. It's not a single list of do's and don'ts. It's an enormously diverse tradition. Much is left to the wisdom of local judges. But certainly insofar as to violate the order of creation and the balance of the world is a crime against the Almighty, as well as a crime against his creatures, I think that there would be very strong grounds in sort of Islamic legal ethical circles for supporting this, certainly to my mind, vitally important initiative that the crime of ecocide, which, as I said, is also a crime of epistemicide, a crime against our spiritual as well as our physical natures, should be added to the list of international statutes and crimes for which the world is collectively committed to exacting punishment. I was involved to some extent in the war crimes trials for former Yugoslavia, and there's something very noble and very sacred about seeing culprits brought to book. Law has a sacred dimension, and I think that we will find our different journeys towards God enhanced when we campaign for justice in this way, facing this great crisis of our age.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I hear different thoughts in this that I would really like to have your discussion or some thoughts that may come up to your discussion. I mean, Rabbi Soetendorp, you talked about a sacred decade. I mean, we have a very short time of acting, and how do you see that faith communities could, and also to go for this ecocide law, how do you see that the interfaith world could to go for this sacred decade that you talked about? Could you help us to think a bit more on that?
Well, I would. Oh yes, okay. The statements and sort of the what we have heard now from Hinduism and from Islam, and of course it is from Judaism and Christianity, pointing to our responsibility. And then to take those God-given perspective, sort of, we are one body. And when one part of the body is in pain, the rest of the body feels it. When we bring it to this moment in time and realizing that we are going from the conference in Copenhagen, the conference in Paris, the conference in Glasgow, and next year in Sharm el-Sheikh, to give another dimension to it by bringing our voices together in one expression, a unified expression that we feel, we know, we hear, that God demands from us to take this period of time, like the Jubilee period in the Bible and other moments expressed, as a sacred time. We have in all our religions this awareness of the sacredness of time. by our festivals, by Shabbat and Sunday and Friday and all those special moments. I would consider a gathering of people from the different religions in a solemn moment to express our awareness that from now on, every day, every month, every year, we see a special destiny for being alive at this moment and aware of the necessity to preserve this earth. And can you imagine that if next year Ecocide Law would be accepted or in the process of acceptance, that such an assembly or assemblies would give a tremendous spiritual dimension to the acceptance of law. Crimes against humanity and genocide, I cannot explain it now why the two are not put into one, but it was an enormous struggle. And again, when we see that without a sacred earth, without the ecosystems really be preserved and flourishing, there is no human, there is no possibility for humanity to survive. So I would like to see more commitment, spiritual commitment, inner commitment to that it is God's call, or the call of the source of all life. The name God may, sometimes be not as unifying as we would like to, but for us who believe that we are in this responsibility towards God, in Judaism, in the Talmud, there is a moment where we speak about God's prayer. God is praying. What prayer is God praying? He is praying that his compassion will be stronger than only the expression of law. Law without love is not possible. And I would say that in such an assembly, imagine that we would say, God, may we fulfill your prayer in this sacred time. This is some of my thoughts and feelings, but the physical expression, how do we do it, has many ways and room for, but we can't waste more time.
Thank you so much. I think I can hear very much of echoing what the interfaith movement have done over the years, and you have been a father to much of the interfaith action. But we still face that urgency. I also see that it's interesting to see how we are. I can hear from all of you this kind of the sacredness, but also a new understanding, or come back to an understanding what it is to be human on this earth, because we are not the masters of the earth. We are living together on it. And as you said before, Abdal, you said before about that it's not religions that is really behind the climate change or the destruction of the earth, to some extent, I give you, it's right. It's also it's very much about the economic system that we have created that is on extractive economy that see no kind of limits for how it can grow. But this kind of sacredness and thoughts, Gopal, maybe you can, have you got any new kind of insights or new views on this and take on this after what you heard the other speakers say? So please, if you would like to say something, Gopal, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Henrik. And again, thank you, Rabbi, for your words. What I've been thinking about it, hearing and meditating on, 10 years to act, the UN calls it the decade of action, and so on. I think why I'm really excited about what we're talking about today in this proposal for Ecocide Law is that in this next decade, we have to be very strategic, we have to be very targeted, and we have to know what the pressure points are to get us to where we need to get to. I think one thing we do in the faith world very well, or that we should do very well, is to meet people where they're at, rather than trying to bash them over the head with a book or whatever, but actually to hear people, see what their needs, interests, and concerns are, and to meet them where they are so we can have a meaningful dialogue. And the international system, international institutions run on law. And so to target the legal system of the world for the International Criminal Court and this proposal for Ecocide, I just think is very smart and just very strategic. I don't think we can waste any more time by trying to do everything under the sun. I think we have to be very considerate and very direct in our action, in our activism, in our advocacy. And I think this proposal speaks to that very, very strongly, because if we can get this done, it changes the game in a very significant way. It allows for so many more conversations to take place. It allows for new worldviews, for different perspectives, for action at a level that we haven't seen before. And so as we lean into this decade of action, this sacred decade, as has been called, I love that phrase, let's lean into what is most strategic. What can we get the most bang for our buck, as they say here in America, where we can have the most impact. And I think this is definitely one of those things.
Thank you. Thank you. It's interesting to have this discussion about where we can have most impact and strategic, and also have this wide discussion about love for our coming generation and the rule of law from our different faith traditions. So, Abdal, Hakim, I would turn to you to see any reactions to what we have heard, and how do you see, what is the future for the interfaith work on this? Do you see that we have, as mentioned, we will have our next COP on will be in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and the other next coming in the COP28 will be in one of the small emirates in the Gulf. I forget the name, excuse me so much, but it will be in two sort of Muslim countries. Do you see that this could be an opener for the interfaith also from your Muslim perspective? What you see is the possibilities to act on this and to find the kind of energy from our faith traditions to go further on this?
Yes, I hope so. And increasingly the perspective in the mosques across the world is that climate change is going to have an impact that falls disproportionately upon the poor and upon the nations of the global south. Many nations of the Muslim band of the world's geography are already feeling the impact of climate change, and many refugees who are now coming to Western Europe causing such a political storm actually climate change refugees, and it's pretty clear that this is what's going on. That probably is just the tip of a gigantic iceberg, as countries that are already stressed by desertification, for instance, rising sea levels, find massive internal displacements that then become external displacements. So there is an awareness, and there are lots of grassroots initiatives and also government initiatives. It's nice to see that Sweden and Morocco this year, I think, were joint first in the race to switch to renewables I think 43% of Morocco's energy consumption domestically comes from renewables, from solar energy, from wind power. And that number is set to grow with the Green Mosques Initiative, which is very big, not just in civil society, but which is supported from the top down as well in Morocco, Indonesia as well. So in terms of the Ecocide Law, perhaps one way forward would be to see how many national jurisdictions can adopt an analogous piece of legislation that then might create a critical mass to sway the larger international structures to adopt such a thing. After all, many of the other international crimes are based on crimes that are already on the law books and in the sort of consensual moral and legal codes of individual nation states. So I think in the Muslim world, but probably universally, people can be pressing, insofar as structures permit, the national structures to recognize ecocide as a crime, so that people who are polluting oases, for instance, or uprooting trees in Pakhtunkhwa province in Pakistan actually face some kind of comeback as perpetrators of a major crime. So if it's incorporated into national jurisdictions in the Muslim world, I think the Muslim world is going to be a little bit more convincing in pressing the larger global systems to act. But of course, it's one of those global inequalities that climate change is largely the fault of rich countries, but the burden is carried largely by the poorer countries. But the poorer countries don't really have much sway in those big international fora, whether it be COP or the UN or various other international agencies, where it tends to be the rich that call the shots. So it's going to be a long struggle, I'm afraid.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning this. We from the World Council of Churches, we have been talking about climate justice for many years now, and now everybody more or less talk about climate justice. And I think that justice is also a part of many of our faith traditions when we talk about justice. And when it comes to climate, justice is about how do we act on this, who are responsible and who must take a larger responsibility to act on climate change. But also I think on ecocide, as you mentioned, I think one thing that we have to do is to actually go to the different governments around the world to say that we need you to pledge for making ecocide an international law. And I think from the faith communities, I see this as we are one of the, I would say, with no self-interest, who have a kind of a moral voice that is important to have when it comes to highlight the importance to have an ecocide law. I hope that we will have our Professor Azza Karam will be joining us in just some minutes. But before she do, I just wanted to give you like a 1 minute to think of what is the future for this work on an ecocide law. What is the purpose? What do you see as most important to have this ecocide law from your tradition's perspective? I go the other way around now, so I will surprise you that Abdal, Hakim, I will invite you first to see what do you see is this kind of keywords for ecocide law.
So in terms of the practical outcomes to be expected, or the method of accomplishing it?
Maybe the method.
Well, unfortunately, there's also a democratic deficit in a lot of Muslim countries in practice. People are seeing already the consequence of climate change in places like Egypt, some of the Gulf states, Bangladesh, but it's not always easy for their real concerns to travel up the chain of command in very autocratic and dysfunctional systems, so that they get something other than suspicion or a visit from the police. It's also a problem in the Muslim world that the religious discourse is often unduly under the sway of international agencies which are directly or indirectly supported by hydrocarbon-rich Gulf states. And that's going to be an issue for the COP summit and other events that happen in the Gulf. There's something rather paradoxical about that.
Yeah.
And it is quite difficult sometimes for Muslim organizations, institutions, universities, civil society initiatives to act in a way that is perceived to be directly against the interests of Saudi Arabia in particular, which has an influence in Muslim diasporas in the West as well as in the Islamic world itself. So yeah, to the extent that Muslim countries are unfree, it's really actually quite difficult for the rather desperate concerns in many cases of base communities actually to be heard and to campaign governments, for instance, to press for international legislation of this kind, because often the political will in very dysfunctional political establishments is simply not there.
Yeah, and thank you for enlightening us on this as well. But I still think that even if there are a deficit of democracy in many states of the world, and including Muslim states as well, I think it's still important that we have this from a theological perspective in our different traditions to also to raise this question. So I'm very happy to have you and have your voice here. And Gopal, what is your last thoughts on this?
Last thoughts are that, again, this is a very much welcomed initiative. Its time has definitely come. Like I said, I do think this is one of the kind of key strategic things we should be pushing as the faith community over the next decade, because it will change the narrative in very significant ways. And, you know, we haven't spoken much about this, but I know this is part of the work. And it also just gives the opportunity to lift up, we've spoken about marginalized, vulnerable communities, specifically indigenous groups and their worldviews, which are often not reflected in international law or institutions. And I think this is almost a gateway to kind of bring those voices to the fore. I often say, and forgive me, this is a little bit politically incorrect, but the cultures and traditions that have been threatened or have been tried to be killed off the planet through colonialism and so on, I think those are the voices that will actually save us in the end. And I think this law gives a voice to those voices that have been unheard and suppressed and oppressed for hundreds of years. And so very, very much welcome this, and very much welcome Dr. Azza Karam, who's also just joined us. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I leave the floor to Professor Azza Karam, I will a last word from Rabbi Awraham Soetendorp. And please unmute.
When we were together in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro for this first conference on ecology all over the world, politicians talked to us, Interfaith, and said, make life for us difficult so that we as governments will take measures that are necessary to save the earth that may, in the short run, contravene national self-interest. I think that what Ecocide Law can help us is to make this transference, to transcend our personal and national barriers, and to really find this cooperation, which somehow is unbelievable that we are not yet grasping it and still seeing all those interests. I hope that Ecocide Law will help us to make this transition.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I have the pleasure to welcome General Secretary of Religions for Peace, Azza Karam. So happy to have you here. We have had a long discussion and a rich discussion that will be on YouTube, so you can watch it afterwards. But I want to invite you to have your thoughts on an Ecocide Law and what faith could do for this, and your views and thoughts. So the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, thank you so very, very much for inviting me into the space. And thank you again for accommodating the fact that I could only join you at such a late hour, and obviously it is my loss, but thank you for recording so I can make sure to follow and learn from the wisdom that was doubtless shared. It is a tremendous privilege for me, Reverend Grape, to be here with you, and also very much to be here with my mentor, Rabbi Soetendorp, who has been a mentor for a lot longer than he realizes, actually. And very much grateful for Gopal and Pella and Sheikh Murad, who has been teaching a lot of us in the Muslim community plenty. I don't believe I would have anything value added to share except the two purposes for which Religions for Peace has been in existence and has come together for the last 50 years. The first purpose is the value added of religious leaders themselves, such as you have now seen here. The religious leaders themselves, faith leaders, being able to champion the causes of social justice for everyone, the common good. So it isn't only for respective faith communities, but the causes of justice for everybody, including those who may be hurting our faith communities, actually. But it is nevertheless a cause that is for the common good of all. And I think this is where yourself, Reverend Grape, and Dr. Murad, and Rabbi Soetendorp, and Gopal from within the communities, this is where that incredible value added is. When Religions for Peace speaks about faith leaders, we refer obviously to the ones who are ordained and have studied religion and can speak authoritatively and represent their institutions. But we also include leadership as a value of service, as a definition of those who serve faith communities, which is absolutely necessary, because otherwise we would find we can't include many women from around the world. We would find ourselves without the women and the young people who serve selflessly, inspired by and because of the demands of their faith, but are not ordained, are not officially representing their religious institutions. So we want to make sure that these are also included. So when we say faith leaders and Religions for Peace, we refer to that community of servants of the divine, ordained and non. The second reason is because is this notion, the mission of Religions for Peace, which is that we, of course, each institution, religious institution, each faith community has a remarkable role to play and tremendous history. The original servants to human beings are religious institutions. So we think we are so fancy with our ministries of foreign affairs, our diplomats, our ministries of social work, our institutions of hospitals, whatever, but actually the original social service providers, healers, were religious institutions and communities, and continue to be in most parts of the world. But the issue isn't that. The issue is, and I think this is the heart of the matter for an ecocide law, how do these communities, institutions, individuals, groups, how do they come together to serve together, to speak and advocate as one? Yes, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Jewish, Buddhist, Jain, Sikh, how do they work together? And that's the mission of Religions for Peace. It was created in order to collate and to amplify the voices and the actions and the intentions of faith communities and faith leaders. So this, I think, is going to be central to, we have many laws. We have many laws. We have plenty conventions. We have so much, then they are absolutely necessary, but they are insufficient. What activates, what motivates, what implements is the collective divine will. And that is what religious leaders, religious institutions, faith communities do when they come together. When each works alone, again, it is like law, it is like legislation. When each faith community, religious institution works alone, it is necessary but insufficient. When we harvest that collective existence, voice, and service, I think that's what makes the difference. And that's why we need the law, absolutely need the law. Each of our faith traditions demands that we behave like a law would maintain and insist. So we need the law. But ultimately, we also need to make sure that we can serve together in this space. So if we can advocate for this together, we will already have achieved a good part of the mission of trying to save the earth, without which we cannot exist. One of the things I've appreciated tremendously when I listened to the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar speaking in our event that we hosted with Faith and Diplomacy in Lindau in October. And he was speaking about the link between Islamic philosophy, which I'm sure that Dr. Murad elaborated upon. But one of the things that particularly struck me was that in the Quran, there are many verses which say that we shall do harm, that humans shall do harm, and harm that does not only harm to the environment, harm to our earth, that it is, we shall do it. So the divine knows that we shall harm. In spite of all the advocacy, the divine knows we shall harm. And the point that is being made is, and the harm will not only be limited to those who do harm. So the perpetrators of the harm are not the only ones who will be harmed by it, because what goes around comes around, but that all will be harmed, that a huge group of people, that humanity itself will be harmed by the damage done by some to this earth, that many will suffer at the hands of some. And therefore the clear advocacy that we cannot each work to redeem separately. No matter how large our communities or institutions, it won't be enough for each of us to work separately. And even if every single Catholic, every single Protestant, every single Jew, every single Jain was to work together in their own communities, if you imagine that solidarity and utter seamlessness of one, it would still not be enough. We would still have to work together to resolve the harm that some do. And that is something we cannot escape from. And I think that's the main advocacy that we have to keep in our hearts all the time, that our mandate is to heal, but we cannot do it alone. We must serve the divine together, be in the service of the divine together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that is very much of what we have been talking in a different way. What you say, the importance to be in this together and not isolate in our different traditions, to reach out to each other, to do what we can do together. And I think that is, especially when it comes to the expression of heaven and Ecocide Law, is very much to find ways on how we can make this world better. And as Rabbi Soetendorp said before, it's love for the coming generation. It's out of love we do this together, love of divine, love of the earth, love of the coming generation. So I'm really happy for this. We should have a short break, and Pella, you can guide us in what's happening now. So over to you, Pella.
Thank you so much, Henrik, and thank you all of you who have spoken. It's really a very rich subject. I wish we would have more time, and I also wish that we can have more time as we try to arrange something bigger in Stockholm in June next year. And lovely that you could join us, Azza. And so as you said, Dr. Karam, we are all faith leaders and we are all needed. I said this is a quite old idea, but it's actually not very well known. So that is one of the aims of this initiative, is to bring it out there, to say this is a real possibility that we together can make happen to protect what is sacred and what is of importance to all our lives, the living earth. So we are going to invite you to the next part of this session, and that will be in a different space in a Zoom meeting. You will have the link in the chat there. And after a short break, all of you who want to be more participative and try to think around, so what does this mean for me in my context? Please get there, and let's meet there in 10 minutes. So thank you so much for this part of the session.